So far we've been talking about research design and then data collection. In this video I want to focus on analysing the responses to your questionnaires. This is one of the harder talks to give simply because there is just too much detail and variation to discuss in a short video. What I decided to provide is the steps that I take when analysing my own questionnaires. However, before I begin, it would be useful to remind you of a few terms we use when talking about questionnaires. Questions can be divided into three types. This is sometimes called level of measurement. Firstly, we have category type questions, which are also known as nominal questions. These are when participants select from a list of categories for their response, such as male or female, or they may include ethnic origin. Secondly, we have ordinal type questions. These are similar to category questions, but instead of the categories being independent, there is some sort of order between them. If we ask people to indicate their age in categories, this is an ordinal type question. Thirdly, we have continuous questions. These are any question that can be answered by a number. It could be an open-ended question asking participants to tell you how many times they attended lectures or how often they used a VLE. Or it could involve asking them to rate the importance or intensity of some experience. The reasons I reminded you of these types of questions is that our choice of question dictates the types of analysis we can use. Therefore, it is important to get our questionnaires correct in the first place. The first step in my data analysis is to code my questionnaire. This means looking at each question and allocating a number for each possible response. For example, on a category type question about gender, I would allocate a 1 for males and 2 for females. If the question is about age and it's measured in categories, I would allocate a 1 for the 15 to 20-year-old age group, a 2 for the 21 to 25 age group, and so on. The next step is to actually transfer the information from my questionnaires into a spreadsheet or a statistical package such as SPSS. Once the questions have been entered, I need to come up with a strategy for my analysis. Ideally, this should be linked to my research questions. If you are planning on doing a quantitative study, then your research questions should reflect this. The first stage for me is to summarise and describe the responses to each of the questions in turn. For category type questions, we count or determine the frequency of a response. For example, I would find the frequency of the occurrence of the males and the females. This is usually reported using percentages and by using bar charts and pie charts. Ordinal questions, such as the responses to various age categories, are reported in the same manner. When it comes to describing and summarising continuous type questions, we use measures of central tendency. In day-to-day language, this is called the average. However, in research language, we refer to the mean, median and mode. So if I have asked people about how often they use a VLE, the mean of the group could be 4.6 times a week. What is also useful to report is the dispersion or the distribution of the responses. One way is to use the range. That's the difference between the smallest and the largest responses. A more rigorous approach would be to use standard deviation. This is less swayed by extreme cases. We call all of these statistics univariate. That is, they look at one question or variable at a time. The next step in my description of my questionnaire data is to do a bivariate analysis. This involves looking at pairs of questions and seeing how they interact or how are they different. A cross-tabulation lets me look at the association between two category type questions. For example, gender and age. As you can see, a cross-tabulation involves firstly dividing my questionnaire up into males and females, and then dividing up the males into the various age categories, and then dividing up the females into the various age categories as well. A stacked bar chart presents this quite well. Remember, all this is doing is summarising and describing the responses. You may also want to do a bivariate analysis involving a category question and a continuous question. Let's say gender is my category question and the use of a VLE is my continuous question. In statistical terms, this is simply a comparison of means. What happens is that we divide our questionnaires into two piles, male and female, then we calculate the mean and standard deviation of the VLE question for just the males. Then we calculate the mean and the standard deviation for the females, and then we compare them. A clustered bar chart presents this well. Remember, once again, all we are doing is summarising and describing the responses at this stage. If we have two continuous type questions and we want to present their relationship, we could use a scatter plot. A scatter plot simply plots each person's response to each of the questions. You can see here how we have plotted the use of VLE against the level of competence with IT. A positive relationship would mean as one increases, so does the other. A negative relationship would mean as one increases, the other decreases. A point to remember is that we don't know which one causes the other, just that they look related. So far, all I have spoken about is descriptive statistical techniques. If we want to raise the rigour of our interpretation, we need to use inferential statistics. Inferential statistics are used as a basis for making predictions based on information obtained from a small group. Inferential statistics help us determine whether the results produced by our research could or could not have been achieved by chance. If the results could have been achieved by chance, then we say they are not significant. If the results could not have been achieved by chance, then they are said to be significant. In the social sciences and education, we usually set the level of confidence at 95%. That means when we say something is significant, we are 95% confident in our analysis. There are a variety of inferential statistic tests. I will just talk briefly about the main ones that you will encounter. So let's go back to my category type question. If I want to see if one of the categories is statistically larger than the others, I would use a one-way chi-squared test. If I use my first example, males and females, I would ask, were there more male responses than female responses? A one-way chi-squared test would tell us whether the difference between the sizes of the two groups is just down to chance or was it really significant? Okay, let's move on. If we look at my bivariate examples, let's look at my two category type questions, gender and age. The cross tabulation from before gave me this table. So the question is the difference I can see in these groups down to chance or are they significant? A two-way chi-squared test is the best to use. Another one of the bivariate tests from before looked at a category type question and a continuous type question. Here is the comparison of the means from before. I can see that the mean of the males is higher than the females. So the question is the difference just down to chance or is it significant? We use a t-test to determine this. If we have more than two groups in our category question, we would use an ANOVA. Finally, we have two continuous questions. This is the scatter plot from before. You can see here how we have plotted the use of VLE against the level of competence with IT. I wanted to determine whether there is a relationship between these variables. So I use a correlation. Once again, it tells me whether the relationship is down to chance or is it significant. So just to summarise, we look for associations between category type questions using a one-way and two-way chi-squared. We look for differences between subgroups on continuous type questions using a t-test or ANOVA. And we look for relationships between continuous type questions using correlations. I know this is a very quick overview. If you're going to use these techniques in your dissertation, then there are some online tutorials on the website to help. And there are several very good textbooks in the reading list.